The Galactic Defense Academy loomed like an architectural migraine against the purple-pink skyline of Nexus 4, a monument to interspecies cooperation, or at least that's what the brochures claimed. In reality, it was more like a pressure cooker of evolutionary grudges wrapped in shiny diplomatic packaging. 17 sentient species had managed to stop trying to exterminate each other long enough to form what they pompously called the Galactic Coalition, which mostly consisted of arguing about trade tariffs and pretending humans weren't scaring the absolute void out of everyone. Humans. The cosmic punchline no one saw coming. When the Coalition discovered Earth 53 years ago, the general consensus had been one of patronizing amusement. The bipedal mammals were just so quaint, still obsessed with physical currency, still killing each other over invisible boundary lines, still convinced chocolate was an acceptable breakfast food. The Coalition's diplomatic corps had practically tripped over their various appendages in their rush to guide these primitive yet promising beings into the galactic community. What a magnificent miscalculation that turned out to be. No one had been prepared for humanity's freakish adaptability, their disturbing pain tolerance, or their absolutely terrifying tendency to make friends with the most dangerous entities in any given room. Within a decade, humans had not only integrated into Coalition society but had begun redesigning it, suggesting improvements to everything from starship propulsion to cafeteria menus. With equal enthusiasm. They're just so enthusiastic, High Commander Zixlorn had complained during the last quarterly assessment meeting, his eye stalks drooping with exhaustion. They never stop asking questions. They never stop trying things. Do you know what one of them asked me yesterday? If we'd considered using black holes as waste disposal units. Black holes! The decision to admit humans to the Galactic Defense Academy had been controversial, to put it mildly. The Academy had existed for 12,000 years as the most elite military training facility in known space. Its graduates became fleet commanders, tactical advisors to planetary governments, and security chiefs for the most sensitive installations in Coalition territory. Letting humans in was like inviting a hurricane to a paper airplane convention. Risky at best, catastrophically stupid at worst, but bureaucracy, that faithful constant across all advanced civilizations, had prevailed. The Treaty of Unified Defense explicitly stated that all Coalition member species were entitled to representation at the Academy. No loopholes, no exceptions, no matter how many appendages were wrung in distress during council meetings. And that's how Cadet First Class Jalen Ochoa found herself sprinting through the dense forest of Simulation Deck 7, sweat plastering her dark curls to her forehead, while the artificial sun beat down through the canopy like an angry god with a magnifying glass. "I told you we shouldn't have gone east," hissed Cadet McSarlstep, their breathing apparatus making each word sound like it was being forced through a garbage disposal. Being a methane breather in an oxygen environment was apparently as uncomfortable as it looked. The topography clearly indicated the topography was designed to be misleading, Jalen countered, checking her tactical display. The tiny holographic projection hovering above her wrist showed 5 red dots converging on their position. "That's literally the point of this exercise. Tactical Survival Training, Phase 3, Day 4. Or, as the upperclassmen called it, the week they scrape you off the floor. A 10-day nightmare of sleep deprivation, simulated combat scenarios, and instructors who seemed to derive unholy joy from watching cadets fail in creative ways. We need to split up," Jalen decided, ignoring Exarchstep's immediate noise of protest. "They're expecting us to stay together. Basic pack psychology." "Humans don't have packs," pointed out Kavan, the third member of their squad. The Raxus stood nearly 7 feet tall, with iridescent scales that caught the simulated sunlight in hypnotic patterns. "You evolved as pair-bonded omnivores with—" "Yes, thank you for the evolutionary biology lesson," Jalen interrupted. "What I mean is, they're hunting us like we're conventional prey. If we scatter, at least one of us might make it to the extraction point." Kavan blinked his vertical eyelids slowly, the Raxus equivalent of a thoughtful hum. "Your species' constant willingness to sacrifice pieces of your collective unit remains disturbing." "It's not sacrifice, it's strategy," Jalen corrected, already calculating trajectories. ZXRLTUP. Head northwest and use the river to mask your thermal signature. Kayvon, your natural camouflage works best in the eastern groves. I'll lead them south, away from both of you. That leaves you exposed, Utrostep pointed out, their voice modulator unable to fully disguise their concern. Jalen flashed a grin that displayed far too many teeth for most Coalition species' comfort. I'm counting on it. The pursuing team of senior cadets found Jalen exactly where she wanted to be found, trapped in a ravine with seemingly nowhere to go. What they didn't realize was that this particular ravine had been part of her study materials for the past 3 weeks. Every simulation deck had patterns, recurring geographical features that the programmers recycled. Most cadets were too busy cramming combat maneuvers to notice. Jalen, however, had spent her precious few hours of free time memorizing terrain, which was why, when Talon Squad thought they had her cornered, she simply stepped backward off what appeared to be a solid rock wall and disappeared into a hidden crevice. Unfortunately, what her research hadn't revealed was that this particular crevice was already occupied. The stunner hit her before she even registered the presence of another being. A cold, paralyzing shock that locked every muscle in her body mid-motion. As consciousness fled, her last coherent thought was a distinctly unprofessional, "Well, shit." Waking up restrained was, unfortunately, not a novel experience for Jalen. The Academy's training regimen included resistance to interrogation, escape techniques, and other cheerful subjects filed under "in case everything goes catastrophically wrong." What was novel was the realization that she wasn't on Academy grounds anymore. For one thing, the air smelled wrong, too metallic, with undertones of something organic and unpleasantly sweet. For another, the restraints binding her to the angled platform weren't standard Academy issue. These were heavier, cruder, clearly designed for a wider range of anatomies than the carefully calibrated training equipment. "The specimen is conscious," announced a voice that seemed to originate from somewhere behind her head. The language wasn't Coalition standard, but a regional dialect from the Outer Rim territories. Jalen recognized it only because she'd had the misfortune of selecting xenolinguistics as an elective. "Excellent," replied a second voice, this one directly in front of her. "Begin recording. This will be submission 43 in our comparative xenobiology series. Subject is a female human, approximately 20 standard cycles, captured during surveillance of Coalition training operations." Jalen forced her eyes open, blinking against harsh lighting that seemed specifically calibrated to give her a headache. As her vision adjusted, she found herself staring at what appeared to be a viridian. 7 feet of spindly limbs, topped with an oversized head housing compound eyes and mandibles that clicked together in what passed for excitement in their species. "Hello, Cadet," the Viridian said, switching to Coalition standard. "Welcome to our humble research facility." Jalen assessed her situation with the detached precision that had earned her top marks in crisis management. She was restrained on an angled platform in what appeared to be a medical laboratory. 3 Viridians were visible, all wearing what looked like environmental protection suits rather than standard scientific attire. Interesting. The room contained an alarming array of equipment that, while she couldn't identify each piece, collectively screamed, "Nothing good is about to happen here." "I'm obligated to inform you," she began formally, "that I am Cadet First Class Jalen Ochoa of the Galactic Defense Academy, service number 77438 Alpha Tango. Under Section 12 of the Coalition Uniform Code, any harassment, detainment, or harm of Academy personnel constitutes an act of aggression against the Coalition itself." The lead Viridian made a sound that might have been laughter if laughter sounded like gravel in a garbage disposal. "How wonderfully by the book! Your instructors would be proud." He leaned closer, mandibles nearly brushing her face. "But I'm afraid the Coalition's regulations don't apply here. We operate outside their jurisdiction." "Ah," Jalen nodded as if this clarified everything. "So, you're idiots, then." The Viridian jerked back as if slapped. "Excuse me?" "Idiots," she repeated helpfully. "Beings of profound intellectual limitation. I just wanted to confirm before we continued this conversation. The second Viridian moved into her field of vision, this one marginally shorter with a slight blue tinge to their exoskeleton. Your species' renowned psychological defense mechanism of humor will not serve you here. We have studied human physiology extensively. We know precisely how much pain you can endure before permanent damage occurs. Jalen raised an eyebrow. That sounds like a challenge. The third Viridian, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward, holding what appeared to be a neural disruptor. A nasty little device that stimulated pain receptors without leaving physical damage. Banned in Coalition space for obvious reasons, we require information about the Academy's defensive protocols, the lead Viridian stated, specifically the algorithmic variables used in the quantum entanglement shields. Provide this, and your suffering will be minimal. Jalen blinked slowly. I'm a second-year cadet. You think they tell us how the quantum shields work? I'm still trying to figure out the cafeteria scheduling system. Dishonesty will only prolong this interaction, the blue-tinged Viridian warned. We know that all cadets receive basic technical specifications as part of emergency protocols. That was actually true, though the information was compartmentalized in ways these Viridians clearly didn't understand. Each cadet received different fragments of critical systems data, theoretically allowing a group of survivors to reconstruct vital information if the Academy was ever compromised. No single cadet possessed enough to be useful alone, but these jokers didn't need to know that. Tell you what, Jalen offered reasonably. Why don't you put down the neural disruptor, untie me, and we can discuss this like civilized beings, over a cup of whatever passes for coffee in this place. The lead Viridian made that gravel in disposal sound again. Initiate level 1 neural induction. The disruptor activated with a soft whine, and Jalen's world exploded into white-hot agony. 2 hours. That's how long they had been at it. 2 hours of methodically increasing pain levels, interspersed with the same questions, repeated in slightly different arrangements, as if rewording might somehow produce different results. For the Viridians, it had been a frustrating exercise in diminishing returns. For Jalen, it had been educational in ways her captors couldn't possibly comprehend. Humans, as a species, had an unfortunate evolutionary history of being simultaneously fragile and stubborn. Their pain thresholds were actually quite average by galactic standards. What wasn't average was their psychological response to pain. Over time, most sentient species experienced pain as a linear progression. More stimulus equaled more distress, continuing until biological limits were reached. Humans, those neurological oddities, experienced something different. After a certain threshold, their perception of pain began to shift. Not diminish, exactly, but transform, becoming something that could be observed rather than merely endured. The Academy instructors called it pain distancing. Jalen called it her secret weapon. Level 8 neural induction has been applied for 20 standard minutes with no information yield, the blue-tinged Viridian reported, frustration evident despite their alien vocal patterns. Subject's vital signs remain within sustainable parameters. Increase to level 9. Ordered the lead Viridian. Jalen, who had been silent for the past 30 minutes, suddenly spoke. Before you do that, I have a question. The Viridians exchanged glances, compound eyes reflecting the harsh laboratory lighting. Curiosity won out over protocol. Speak, human. I've noticed something interesting about your exoskeletons, she said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather rather than turning up her torture dial. There's a distinct discoloration pattern forming around your breathing apparatus seals. Are you aware of it? The blue-tinged Viridian involuntarily raised a limb toward their face before catching themselves. Psychological manipulation is ineffective. Not manipulation, Jalen corrected. Observation. The discoloration is spreading approximately 3 millimeters every 20 minutes. Started at the seal points, now it's creeping along the primary tracheal ridges. She tilted her head, studying them with clinical interest. Classic signs of microscopic breach, wouldn't you say? The third Viridian, who had been operating the neural disruptor, took an unconscious step backward. Impossible. Our containment protocols are designed for known biological hazards, Jalen finished. But here's the funny thing about humans that nobody seems to properly appreciate. We're walking biohazards. This wasn't entirely inaccurate. Human beings hosted an astounding variety of microorganisms, most harmless to themselves but potentially problematic for other species with different biochemistry. It was why first contact protocols included extensive decontamination procedures, and why many non-human establishments in coalition space politely but firmly requested that human visitors wear specialized filters over their respiratory orifices. Your containment suits, Jalen continued, are rated for standard coalition biological classifications. But humans? We're not standard. Never have been. Something the Academy discovered pretty quickly. Why do you think the human dormitories are in a separate ventilation sector? This was complete nonsense. The dormitory arrangement was purely political, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. The Viridians were now openly examining each other's exoskeletons, mandibles clicking in agitation. "You're lying," the lead Viridian declared, but his compound eyes kept darting to the discoloration that, now that it had been pointed out, did seem to be spreading along his colleague's respiratory structures. "This is another psychological tactic," Jalen sighed dramatically. "Look, I get it, pride and all that, but that modeling around your primary spiracles, that's not normal for Viridian exoskeletons. And that clicking sound when you breathe, that's new in the last 20 minutes. The blue Viridian was now visibly distressed, limbs moving in the agitated pattern that signified extreme anxiety in their species. "We should run decontamination protocols, just to be certain." "Unnecessary," snapped the leader, but Jalen noticed he was keeping his distance from his subordinates now. "The human is attempting to—" "Did I mention that I was in the Academy infirmary last week?" Jalen interrupted. "Some kind of respiratory thing going around. Doctor couldn't identify it, said it was probably nothing to worry about for humans." She paused meaningfully. "For humans," the third Viridian abruptly dropped the neural disruptor. "I can feel it. Something in my tertiary bronchial passages. A pressure that wasn't there before. Psychosomatic," the leader insisted, but his voice had lost its authoritative edge. "Maybe," Jalen agreed reasonably. "Probably, even. But here's the thing about unknown human pathogens. By the time you're sure, it's usually too late. There was this incident on Proxima Station last year. Well, I shouldn't really talk about it. Classified and all that. Let's just say they had to vent 3 entire decks to vacuum. This, too, was an outrageous fabrication. The most dramatic biological incident on Proxima Station had involved a shipment of fermented earth condiments that had exploded in the cargo bay, producing an odor so foul that 2 decks had required emergency deodorization. But the Viridians didn't know that. "Initiating emergency decontamination," the blue Viridian announced, moving toward a control panel. "Wait," the leader commanded, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "We haven't completed the interrogation protocol." "With respect, primary researcher," the third Viridian interjected, "I calculate a 72% probability that we have been exposed to an unknown biological agent. The discoloration pattern matches 3 known pathogenic responses in our species." Jalen coughed theatrically. All 3 Viridians flinched back. "Oh, excuse me," she said with exaggerated concern. "Hope that's not contagious. You know how these things can mutate when jumping species? Fascinating process, really. Starts with respiratory distress, usually progresses to neurological symptoms within the first hour of exposure." The blue Viridian was now frantically working the control panel. "Emergency protocols engaged. Atmospheric purge in 30 seconds. "Override that command," the leader shrieked, rushing toward the console. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Jalen called out helpfully. "Disrupting decontamination mid-cycle could aerosolize any present pathogens." "Basic xenobiology. Didn't they teach you that in evil scientist school?" The leader froze, compound eyes swiveling between his subordinates, the control panel, and their human prisoner. In that moment of indecision, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. "Atmospheric containment breach detected," announced an automated system. "Emergency protocols initiated. All personnel proceed to designated safe zones." "What did you do?" the leader demanded of the Blue Viridian. "Standard decontamination protocol," they protested. "But the system is showing anomalous readings in sectors 7 through 12. That's impossible. Those areas are supposed to be sealed." Jalen adopted an expression of exaggerated concern. "Oh dear. Sounds like your containment systems might be compromised. Those pathogens could be anywhere by now." The third Viridian made a high-pitched keening sound and bolted for the door. "We need to reach the emergency evacuation pods. The sterilization protocols—" "Nobody is evacuating," the leader shouted, but his authority was rapidly disintegrating along with the cohesion of his research team. "The human is manipulating us." "Maybe," Jalen agreed cheerfully. "But are you willing to bet your lives on that? Because I've been exposed to whatever this is for a week, and I'm still kicking. You, on the other hand, are showing classic Stage 1 symptoms. Stage 2 involves your spiracles fusing shut, I believe. Nasty way to go." The Blue Viridian had abandoned the control panel and was now frantically examining their own exoskeleton with a medical scanner. "Primary researcher, I'm detecting abnormal cellular activity in my respiratory tissues. The human was right." "That's impossible," the leader insisted, but he was backing toward the exit now. "Our intelligence indicated nothing about biological weapons training for cadets." "Oh, it's not training," Jalen said with a disturbing grin. "Just a happy accident of evolution. We're walking petri dishes, didn't you know? Billions of years of microscopic warfare happening inside every human, all the time. Makes us pretty robust, but terrible roommates." The facility alarms increased in volume and urgency. Red emergency lighting cast grotesque shadows across the laboratory. "Full evacuation protocol initiated," the automated system announced. "Facility sterilization commencing in 3 minutes. All personnel must vacate immediately." The Blue Viridian broke first. "Release the human. Maybe she knows how to counteract the pathogen." "We cannot release our subject," the leader protested, but his resolve was crumbling visibly. "The research will be worthless if we're dead," screeched the Blue Viridian, shoving past their superior to reach Jalen's restraints. "Human, if we release you, will you assist us? Your academy must have protocols for containing these situations." Jalen put on her most solemn expression. "I'll do what I can. But first, your communications array. I need to send an emergency signal to the Academy Medical Corps. They'll have the quarantine procedures." "Absolutely not," the leader objected. "That would reveal our location to coalition forces." "Researcher, we have no choice," the Blue Viridian pleaded, already releasing Jalen's restraints. "Look at your lateral spiracles. The discoloration has spread to the secondary chambers." The leader reflexively touched his breathing apparatus, mandibles clicking in distress. The moment of hesitation was all Jalen needed. As soon as her right arm was free, she grabbed the neural disruptor the third Viridian had dropped and swung it in a precise arc. 30 seconds later, all 3 Viridians were unconscious on the laboratory floor, and Jalen was accessing their communications system. The facility alarms continued to wail dramatically in the background. "Emergency protocol override," she typed into the system. "Cancel sterilization sequence. Voice authentication required." The system responded. Jalen sighed and glanced at the unconscious Viridians. "The things I do for the job," she muttered, before grabbing the leader by his mandibles and positioning his face near the voice receiver. A quick application of pressure to a specific point on his thorax produced an involuntary vocalization, just enough to satisfy the system's authentication requirements. "Sterilization sequence canceled," the system confirmed. "Would you like to reset emergency protocols?" "Absolutely," Jalen replied, already moving to the adjacent console to access the facility's communication array. "And while you're at it, how about sending a distress signal with our coordinates to the Galactic Defense Academy? Tell them Cadet First Class Ochoa would really appreciate a ride home. The Academy retrieval team found her sitting calmly in the facility's command center, feet propped up on the console, eating what appeared to be the Viridian equivalent of emergency rations, which, based on her expression, tasted about as good as emergency rations in any species cuisine. "Took you long enough?" she greeted them, tossing aside the half-eaten ration bar. "I was about to start naming the local rodent population for company." Lieutenant Commander Vexlor, the Academy's head of security, surveyed the scene with his 4 eyes blinking in asynchronous patterns that indicated extreme confusion. "Cadet, preliminary report. How exactly did you—" He gestured at the security monitors showing 3 Viridians locked in a storage compartment, all huddled as far from each other as the space would allow. "Manage this." Jalen shrugged modestly. "Just applied my xenobiology training, sir. Turns out Viridians are really concerned about interspecies contamination. Can't imagine why." Vexlor's eyes narrowed. "You convinced 3 Outer Rim bioterrorists that you were contagious? I may have implied that humans harbor unique pathogens particularly devastating to Viridian physiology," she admitted. "And I might have mentioned that the discoloration on their exoskeletons, completely normal oxidation from their environmental suits, by the way, was actually the first sign of a horrific respiratory disease that would eventually cause their breathing spiracles to fuse shut." One of the retrieval team members, a Tyrellian with characteristic golden scales, made a choking sound that might have been suppressed laughter. "And they believed you?" Vexlor pressed, mandibles twitching in what Jalen had learned was the equivalent of raised eyebrows. "Sir, with all due respect to our Viridian allies in the coalition," Jalen replied with perfect diplomatic poise, "these particular individuals weren't selected for this mission based on their critical thinking skills." The Tyrellian lost his battle with composure and burst into full laughter. Even Vexlor's mandibles relaxed into what passed for amusement in his species. "Well, Cadet," the commander said, "it seems your unconventional approach to resistance training has yielded unexpected results. I believe this qualifies as passing Phase 3 with distinction." Jalen blinked. "Did you really think you were randomly abducted by Outer Rim terrorists during a routine training exercise?" Vexlor asked, amusement now evident in his multi-tonal voice. "This was your extreme scenario assessment. All second-year cadets undergo a simulated capture and interrogation." Jalen stared at him, processing this information. "So those weren't actual Viridian bioterrorists?" "Oh, they were Viridians," Vexlor confirmed. "From our Advanced Tactical Training Division. Volunteers who enjoy, as humans say, getting into character." He gestured at the monitors. "Though I suspect they're regretting their commitment to authenticity at the moment." The realization dawned slowly. "So I wasn't actually abducted. This was all part of the training?" "Correct. And there was never any actual danger." "Also correct. And I just terrorized 3 Academy instructors into believing they were dying of a fictional human disease." Vexlor said with unmistakable pride, "is extremely correct. And a coalition record for ESA completion, I might add. Previous record was 4 minutes, 17 seconds before the cadet either broke or turned the tables. You managed it in 30 seconds. Jalen considered this information for a long moment before a slow grin spread across her face. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Granted. Next time, could someone please tell the terrorists that their atmospheric decontamination controls are labeled in Coalition Standard? Kind of a giveaway." Vexlor made the gravel disposal sound that Jalen now recognized as genuine Viridian laughter. "I'll be sure to include that in my after-action report, Cadet, along with a recommendation that future abductors brush up on their xenopathology before attempting to interrogate humans." As the retrieval team escorted her back to their shuttle, Jalen couldn't help but wonder what psychological evaluation awaited her back at the academy. Somehow, she suspected that, convinced trained interrogators they were dying of a fictional disease within 30 seconds wasn't the expected outcome on the assessment rubric. Then again, perhaps it was time the galaxy learned what they should have figured out 53 years ago. When it comes to humans, always expect the unexpected. Somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the Galactic Coalition, a new note was added to the ever-growing file labeled Reasons to be Concerned About Humans. They don't just endure pain, they take notes. And then they use them against you. The universe would never be the same.